My parents packed my things and told me to leave the house on my birthday. Years later, they showed up claiming they kicked me out to push me toward independence and that my house was their achievement. The day my life truly began was when my parents threw me out like trash on my own birthday. I had just ended a hard shift and was hoping for a cheap takeaway meal and a short, quiet celebration. Instead, I pulled into the driveway and noticed my clothing laptop and boxes heaped up on the front porch as if they were cleaning away old rubbish. My mother stared me directly in the eyes and informed me I was done living there. On my birthday, my father stood behind her without arguing. I recall my hands trembling as I realized they were serious. There was no surprise party inside, no cake or candles, just my belongings on the doorstep and a chilly message. I was gone, and they were carrying on without me. Every phrase I wanted to shout became lodged in my throat. At that point, my parents kicked me out on my birthday, and I didn't say anything. I just picked up my boxes, piled them into my beat-up automobile, and drove off. There was no major confrontation and no dramatic parting, only quiet and the sound of all I knew shattering in my rearview mirror. I believed that was the worst thing they could possibly do to me. But over a decade later, after I had battled my way back and had purchased my own house, they arrived at my front door, went around my living room as if they owned it, and calmly told me, "This is a family asset. If you want to discover how the girl they booted out on her birthday ended up buying the house they attempted to steal, stick with me to the end. It happened on my 27th birthday, which is meant to be the day you feel like everyone is delighted you exist." I finished my shift at the grocery store, my feet throbbing and smelling like spilled coffee, but I was still hopeful. On my break, I purchased myself a cheap cupcake from the bakery aisle, figuring that if no one else congratulated me, I would. Driving home, I believed there was something modest waiting for me. Maybe there are pizza boxes on the counter. Maybe a store-bought cake with my name slightly misspelled. When I turned into our street, I noticed it. No balloons, automobiles, or decorations. Just my life piled on the grass. My luggage, boxes of clothes, a plastic bucket with my old textbooks, and a used monitor covered in a blanket. I briefly considered whether there had been a leak or an emergency. I parked crookedly, left the cupcake on the seat, and headed to the house. My mother stood on the porch, her arms folded. My father hovered behind her, staring at the ground. My youngest sister, Ava Morgan, sat on the steps, looking through her phone. My parents did not wish me a happy birthday. She said, "You're 27. Claire Morgan, this has lasted long enough. We need the room. You have to leave." I gazed at her. "You are doing this today, on my birthday." She rolled her eyes. "Do not make this overly dramatic. We reared you. We have done our part. You hold a job. You'll figure it out." My father eventually glanced up long enough to say, "This is for your own good. You will grow if you are pushed." Ava smirked and said, "Everyone I know has moved out long ago. You should be thanking Mom." I wanted to shout that I was the one who paid the majority of the electricity bills and that the Wi-Fi she used for her classes remained on because of me, but I knew how it would end. My mother sobbing and calling me ungrateful, my father receding and Ava filming. In the end, I would still be outside, but with additional bruises on my throat from yelling, so I didn't give them a show. I inquired gently, "Where should I go?" My mother shrugged. "You're an adult. Stay with a pal. Find something inexpensive. Just don't expect to come back. We need to transform your space into something helpful, useful, as if I'd never existed." My parents kicked me out on my birthday, and I didn't say anything. I picked up a box, took it to my beat-up car, and continued until everything was loaded. No begging or bargaining, just a scratch of cardboard on concrete. I took one final look at the front door and knew it was no longer my home if it ever was. I drove till the homes faded away and highway signs took over. Then I stopped into a poor rural hotel that had half of its sign burned out. The chamber smelled like old smoke and bleach, but I had the key in my palm and no one could order me to leave. I sat on the side of the uncomfortable bed, ate a cold cupcake alone, and checked my bank account. The number was modest and frightening. For a moment, I considered calling my mother to ask for a few days of grace. Then I remembered how confident she seemed with my belongings on the lawn. They had not hesitated, so neither did I. Lying on that scratchy blanket, looking at the discolored ceiling, I promised myself I would never ask to return to a place that treated me like garbage on the day I realized I deserved better. If they really wanted me gone, I'd figure out a way to make them regret pushing me out the door one day. I awoke the morning after that hotel night with a sore neck, a pounding headache, and no safety net. I checked my phone, half anticipating a missed call from my parents, an apology, or at the very least, "What hotel are you staying at?" Perhaps we overreacted. There was nothing but a calendar notice that read, "Happy birthday, Claire Morgan," like a nasty prank from an app that didn't know any better. So I did the only sensible thing. I got up, washed in cold water, put on my uniform, and drove to work as if my entire world had not suddenly turned upside down. I performed my grocery store shift that day, pretending everything was normal, smiling at customers, scanning things, and making small chat about deals and recipes, all while my head yelled, "You have nowhere to sleep tonight." During my break, I searched for rooms for rent on my phone, sifting by cheapest first, and hoped for anything that did not resemble a horror movie set. Seattle was roughly 90 minutes away, and the rents made my stomach turn. But staying in the motel was not an option. By the end of the day, I'd planned to visit a little studio in the city, the sort with peeling paint and a view of a brick wall. It was cramped and expensive, but the landlord didn't ask too many questions as long as I paid the deposit. I signed the documents with the wobbly assurance of someone who isn't sure how they'll afford next month. The first several weeks were terrible. I retained my grocery store work, but the commute was long and the salary barely covered my rent, so I took on a second job performing late-night shifts at a burger restaurant a few blocks from my studio. My days became a cycle. Wake up before sunrise, go to work, scan items and bag for 9 hours, take a fast snack in the vehicle, clock in at the burger joint, smell like fries and grease till 1 a.m., stumble home, wash, pass out, and repeat. There was no time to think about my parents, which was sort of the goal. One night at the grocery store, a woman walked through my line, who I knew right away, Rachel Bennett. She'd been a regular for months, usually carrying a laptop bag and a Bluetooth headset and chatting about deadlines and investors on her phone. I was not sure what she did, but it seemed essential. That night she was distracted skimming through her emails while I rang up her belongings. When her reusable bag ripped, I instinctively helped her repack everything. I put it together, double-bagged the hefty goods, and cracked a silly joke about duct tape holding adult life together. She genuinely chuckled and glanced at my name tag. "You are the girl that always repairs the self-checkouts, correct?" she asked. I shrugged, a little ashamed. When the machines froze, I merely punched a couple buttons to reset them, but she made it sound as if I were doing surgery. She inquired about how long I had been there, and before I could stop myself, the entire narrative came crashing out in a shortened form. My parents kicked me out. I'm figuring things out. 2 jobs, a little flat, and no plans beyond survival. Instead of making the typical pity grimace, she simply glanced at me for a moment and remarked, "You know, my startup is always looking for people who can problem solve and actually show up. Do you ever think about technology?" I chuckled because it sounded so absurd. I did not even graduate college, and neither did tech. She informed me about coding boot camps, how many people change jobs without a degree, and how the internet was packed with free materials. She then did something surprising. She placed her email address on the back of my receipt and stated, "If you are serious about transforming your life, write me a message. I can't guarantee you anything, but I can put you in the right direction." That night after my burger shift, I sat at the little table in my studio, my laptop open, looking for everything she had stated. Free classes, beginner-friendly lectures, and coding boot camps in Seattle. The words on the screen may have been in another language, but one concept stuck with me. I'd already lost everything once. What was the worst-case scenario if I tried and failed again? Over the next few months, I carved out previously unoccupied time slots. I watched JavaScript lessons throughout my lunch breaks. I printed cheat sheets and put them over my thrift shop desk. I joined free internet groups where individuals asked and answered questions I didn't understand. But very slowly, things began to click. Late one night, after finishing a practice assignment, I had the guts to contact Rachel. I assured her I was serious. I provided screenshots of my sloppy small websites, which I had created by duplicating tutorials line by line and then altering them. She responded not with a job offer, but with something greater, a link to a part-time coding bootcamp she recommended, along with a comment that stated, "If you get into this and commit, I will talk to my team about an internship." I applied, figuring it was a long shot. I somehow managed to get in. My schedule got ridiculous. Grocery shopping in the morning, burgers on fewer nights since I needed to study, and boot camp courses in the evenings and on weekends. I survived on ramen, black coffee, and the occasional free meal when the burger joint made mistakes. My friends stopped inviting me out since the response was invariably, "I have to work or study." There were several evenings when I felt foolish and behind gazing at error messages until my eyes burned. There were days when I wanted to quit, especially when my body seemed to give up before my intellect. But every time I considered quitting, I saw that mound of my possessions on my parents' lawn again. I overheard my mother remark, "You will thank us one day." I concluded that if I ever had to thank them, it would be for underestimating my abilities. About 18 months later, I completed the boot camp. I wasn't a great coder, but I could make things work. Rachel scheduled an interview with her business, and for the first time in my life, I sat in a conference room wearing actual clothing rather than a polo with a name tag. I discussed problem-solving and customer irritation in the grocery store, late-night teamwork at the burger joint, and grit from juggling it all while learning something completely new. They engaged me as an associate front-end developer. The income was more than my previous positions combined, and there was a clear route for advancement. When the offer email arrived in my inbox, I stood in the center of my tight studio and simply gazed at it. The girl who had packed her life into a hotel room on her birthday was now being recruited to work for a software business in Seattle. I didn't weep. I didn't call my parents. I simply murmured to myself, "You cast me out to make way for Ava and her future. You really wanted me gone. All you actually did was give me space to create my own." When I first began at the business as an associate developer, I felt like an imposter in my life. The workplace was in downtown Seattle with all-glass windows and cold brew on tap, the type of location I used to believe only existed in films. For the first several months, I expected someone to stroll up, touch my shoulder, and tell me they had made a mistake, that I was meant to be back at the grocery shop asking customers if they preferred paper or plastic. Instead, I continued to turn up. I asked foolish questions. I remained late to repair bugs. I saw how senior developers addressed difficulties and adopted their behaviors. I took notes on everything. Rachel never regarded me like a charity case. She assigned me genuine tasks and provided real feedback, sometimes harsh enough to hurt, but always followed by, "You can do better than this, and I know it." My code gradually broke less, and my confidence broke more in the correct places. Nearly 2 years have passed. I progressed from junior to mid-level. I received my first increase and then another. For the first time, my financial account was no longer an emergency. I stayed in that little studio for longer than necessary, partly because I was afraid the good run would stop, and partly because I was accustomed to cramming myself into tight places. However, one day, my lease notice arrived with a rent increase that made my eyes expand. I sat at my small table, a spreadsheet open, recording my income and spending, and something crazy began to develop on the edge of my consciousness. What if instead of paying extra for the shoebox, I invested the money in something I genuinely owned? The thought of having anything larger than a thrift shop couch was absurd. Yet, I couldn't shake it. I started listening to personal finance podcasts on my commutes. I understood what a credit score was and what a down payment looked like in numbers rather than just hazy adult language. I searched through my internet accounts and noticed something ridiculous. Between my paycheck, a few freelance internet jobs on the side, and the fact that I'd been too afraid to spend for years, I had saved money. Not affluent people's funds, but enough to spark a serious discussion. I spoke with a loan officer who explained financing alternatives, pre-approval, and interest rates. It felt like he was speaking another language, but I continued asking questions until the figures made sense. "You are in a far better situation than most individuals your age," he stated. I remembered my parents telling me I was a burden and that I would never develop unless they pushed me out. I didn't say it aloud, but part of me wanted to frame the email and post it on their old front door. I spent weekends traveling various communities. Some were completely out of my league with immaculate artificial families in the brochures. Some were run down and gloomy, hitting too close to where I had begun. Then I went into a tiny 4-story home in Ballard that wasn't glamorous enough for a magazine cover, but was substantial. Clean lines, a little lawn, and a modest balcony off the master bedroom. The sunlight filtered through the living room windows, just perfectly capturing dust motes in the air like glitter. The kitchen was open with enough counter space to make actual cuisine, rather than simply microwaving whatever was on offer. Upstairs, there was a supplementary room that might be used as an office, a guest room, or perhaps a location where I could create something altogether new. I stood there, listening to the silence, and for the first time since leaving my parents' house, I felt what home might be like when it didn't belong to someone who could toss me out at any moment. I submitted an offer. The talk seemed like a game I hadn't prepared for, but my agent walked me through it. When I received the call that my offer had been accepted, I was sitting at my desk at work gazing at a bug report. I had to go into the stairway to collect my breath. The girl who had formerly collected change to pay a motel bed was ready to sign documents putting her name on a property deed. On the final day, I sat in a boring office signing stack after stack of paperwork. Every time the pen touched the page, I remembered a new version of myself. The child sneaking grocery store sushi into her bedroom, the cashier with painful feet, the youngster covering her stuff in blankets on the grass as her relatives observed. Each signature seemed like a line that separated me from the past. When it was over, the woman across from me slipped the final document away and said, "Congratulations, homeowner." Entering the townhouse with my own keys seemed unreal. There was no furniture yet, only echoing rooms and bare walls that smelled of new paint and possibilities. That night, I lay on the living room floor with a single pillow and a blanket looking up at the ceiling, listening to the buzz of the city outside and the deep silence within. Nobody could walk in and tell me I was taking up too much room. Nobody could determine that my room was needed by someone else. This location has my name on it. Over the following few months, I established a life behind those confines. I purchased a couch that did not come from the curb. I put up a good workstation with a real monitor in the spare room and named it my office. I invited a few work pals, cooked for them, laughed too loudly, and no one complained about the noise. On clear nights, I'd stand on the little balcony with a mug of tea looking out over the neighborhood and reflecting on the journey from that rural hotel to here. I began publishing parts of my experience online, not to vent about my parents, but to discuss getting booted out, reaching rock bottom, and fighting my way back. People began replying. Strangers messaged me stating they felt seen and that their families had driven them out in various ways. For the first time, my sorrow seemed beneficial to someone other than myself. I believed the narrative would finish there. I got kicked out on my birthday, battled my way up, and purchased a house. It was a lovely little arc, but life isn't a movie, and evidently, my folks did not enjoy being left out of the finale. One tranquil Sunday afternoon, I was unloading groceries and singing to myself when my doorbell rang. I didn't think much about it. Maybe a package or a neighbor. I cleaned my hands on a towel, headed to the front door, and checked the camera screen out of habit. When I noticed who was standing on my porch, my stomach fell. My mother, father, and sister. All three of them stood at the front entrance of the house I had built without them. For a moment, I thought the camera was malfunctioning. No, it was them. My mother in front with grayer hair and more makeup. My father collapsed behind her while Ava Morgan stood off to the side holding her phone. I could have pretended I wasn't home, but I'd had enough of hiding in places I paid for. I opened the door. My mother examined me before passing me inside the home. "Claire Morgan. You seem different," she commented, her gaze already scanning my furnishings. "What are you doing here?" I asked. My father attempted a quiet voice. "Can we come in for a minute? It's important." Against my better judgment, I stepped back. They strode in as if they owned the air. My mother ran her fingertips along the couch. "This is nice. Much nicer than the small house you used to have." Ava looked about, impressed despite herself. "Damn, Nat, you really got yourself a full house." I stayed near the kitchen island. "Why are you here?" I asked again. My father sighed. "Things have been challenging. I lost my job. Our mortgage is killing us. We could lose our house." My mother cut in. "The bank does not care how long we've been there. They only want money. We heard you purchased a property. This alters everything." I felt a flash of pity, but it faded quickly. "I'm sorry things are difficult," I said. "But how does that relate to my home?" My mother gave me a look that suggested I was being dense. "This is more than simply your house," she explained. "This is a family asset." The phrase landed like a stone. "Excuse me," I replied. She motioned to the walls. "We reared you. Roof, food, and clothing. We encouraged you to be independent. If we hadn't forced you out, you'd still be trapped in that dead-end grocery shop. Our fierce love shaped who you are. So obviously what you have today should benefit the entire family." My father nodded. "We're not asking for much. We only need to stay here for a time. Your mother and I may have one room and Ava another. You still have that office, correct? You don't need a whole space simply for a workstation. Maybe we'll even put our names on the paper so the bank recognizes it as shared. It benefits everyone." I nearly laughed. "You kicked me out because you said there was no room," I reminded them. "You required my bedroom for Ava's online lessons. Now my house is the answer to all of your troubles." My mother waved her hand. "We did it for you," she snapped. "If we hadn't pushed you, you wouldn't have left. You should feel grateful. Our investment is paying off." A family asset, Ava joined in. "Mom was correct. You achieved a higher level. Everyone I know has moved out years ago. You have spare rooms. Why are you acting so selfishly?" There it was, the ancient word. I am not being selfish by living in the house for which I worked and paid. I mentioned that you did not co-sign anything. You are not on the deed. This is mine. My mother's eyes became stern. "You wouldn't have this job without us. We made sacrifices, we struggled, we pushed you. You owe us one signature, and your parents aren't on the street. Would you rather see us homeless while you sit here alone?" Guilt used to work on me. Now it only made me exhausted. "You made your decision," I said. "I created mine. I'm not jeopardizing my house or my future, so pretend this is a communal project." Ava scoffed. "Money has a significant impact on your life." I shook my head. Being treated as trash on my birthday changed me. Money only means you can't do it again. My mother's voice sank. "If you do not assist us, we will pursue legal action. We're your parents. We have rights. Any judge will see this as a family asset that you are hoarding." For a brief while, the old terror returned. Then I recalled whose name was on every important page. "Contact any lawyer you choose," I said. "You aren't moving in. You are not allowed to touch my residence, and you must leave immediately." My father tried one final time. "Claire, please. We're your family." "You did it," I responded. I swung the door wide. Cold light poured in. "Last time you told me to go. This time, I'm the one asking you to depart." My mother gave a harsh chuckle and moved past me. My father followed, looking at the floor. Ava walked by and said, "You are going to regret this." I shut the door and turned the lock. My hands shook. Yet behind the adrenaline there was a constant calm. They had entered my house confident that the words "family asset" would be enough to terrify me into giving up all I had achieved. They still assumed I was the girl whose life was in boxes on their yard. They had no notion that this time I wasn't the one to be terrified. When the door clicked shut behind them, I stood there with my back to it, breathing hard and hearing their threat reverberate in my brain like a horrible advertisement. Legal action, family assets, and parental rights. The old me would have gone crazy Googling legislation at 2:30 a.m. and imagining the worst-case situations. The version of myself that had signed a mortgage and debugged code at 200 a.m. understood better than to let panic be the sole strategy. So I did what I usually do when I feel out of my element. I phoned someone who knew exactly what they were talking about. In this case, that someone was Daniel Cruz, a person I met years ago through a buddy of a friend who had gone from bartending to law school as I was transitioning from grocery store clerk to developer. We had reunited in Seattle when I discovered he was practicing civil law and assisting with tenant and financial problems. We weren't best friends, but we trusted each other enough to swap war stories about shady landlords and employers. I texted him, "Hey, I believe my folks are going to do something insane with my house. Have you got time to talk?" He phoned within 40 minutes. I told him everything from getting booted out on my birthday to the visit in my living room and my mother saying the words "family asset" like a bomb. When I finished, I heard a long silence on the other end. "Okay," he eventually added. "First and foremost, breathe. They are not on your deed." "Correct? Correct?" I stated I bought this house years after they evicted me. They didn't assist with anything. It is in my name solely. "Then technically they have no ownership claim just because they share DNA," he stated. "They may argue all day about what is fair or familial, but in court paper wins over guilt trips." I felt a little knot of stress relax in my chest, so they can't truly force me to give them anything. No judge will instantly transform your private property into a shared family asset just because your mother believes she deserves a portion, he added. But there's something more we should consider. You mentioned that while you lived there, you helped them with paperwork and bills, correct? Yes, I replied slowly. I was the only person who could browse online forums without shrieking at the computer. Why? Because the individuals who feel entitled to your house years later are frequently the same people who felt entitled to your knowledge at the time, he stated. Before we do anything more, I want you to retrieve your entire credit report. Not the adorable free app version, but the genuine one. We need to make sure they haven't already been exploiting you to support themselves financially. The notion made my stomach plummet. I recall sitting at their kitchen table years ago, filling out lines on credit card applications as my mother hustled me saying, "Just sign here, it's for the family." I was too exhausted and trusting to ask questions. I now see those recollections in a different perspective. That night I sat at my desk in the home office they wanted to claim, entered all 3 major credit bureaus and asked for my reports. When they eventually loaded, I felt as if I was peeking into someone else's life. There were accounts that I recognized. My student debt for the 2 semesters of college I completed before dropping out, my own credit card, my car's auto loan. And then there were accounts I'd never seen before, shop cards I'd never used. A line of credit created the year I was booted out. A few tiny personal loans in my name tied to an address I used to share with my parents. My chest got chilly. I contacted Daniel back and explained what I was witnessing, that he gently said is identity theft. At best, illegal usage, and at worst, blatant fraud. And if your parents open them in your name without your knowledge or consent, we'll need to do more than send a harsh email. Over the following few weeks, my life became a strange blend of routine and unreal. By day, I went to work, produced code, attended meetings about product roadmaps, and joked with coworkers in the kitchen. By night, I sat at my dining table with Daniel on speakerphone, gathering documents, underlining dates, cross-checking addresses, and piecing together the paper trail of how my parents discreetly transformed my name into a safety net while calling me a burden in front of me. Daniel Cruz assisted me in filing official challenges with credit bureaus over accounts that I did not establish. We contacted the banks and lenders, wrote notarized letters, and provided affidavits stating that I had been booted out and had no knowledge of the obligations. Some institutions acted cooperatively. Others treated me as if I were the one running a fraud. Every time a customer service representative questioned my narrative, I considered phoning my parents and yelling at them. Instead, I reminded myself that I would not be cleaning up their mess for them. I was purifying my name for myself. At the same time, Daniel requested a restraining order based on my parents' threats and history of kicking me out. We supplied screenshots of texts my mother sent following the visit messages such as, "You will regret choosing a house over your family, and we will make sure everyone knows how heartless you are." They mistook them for guilt trips. The court saw them as harassment. "Are you sure you want to go through with it?" Daniel questioned me one night. "Once we file, it becomes official. This is no longer merely a family disagreement." I remembered the girl who had stood on the grass, her life in boxes, while her own mother ordered her to work it out. I imagined them marching into my home as if they were entitled to it and asking me to sign over control without blinking. "Yeah," I answered, "I'm sure." They didn't hesitate when they kicked me out. I'm done being hesitant when it comes to defending myself. The court first issued an interim injunction, preventing my parents from visiting my home or job while the full hearing was arranged. When the papers were served, my phone exploded. My mother called and left voicemails shouting about treachery and disgrace. My father wrote lengthy messages outlining how this could all be handled quietly. Ava sent a single message. "You actually drew the law into this tragic situation." I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I sent everything to Daniel. He put it to the file, and then softly another piece moved across the board. Some of the challenged accounts prompted internal inspections by the lender. One of them saw suspicious tendencies and sent the material to a government agency. Another one, related to a bogus home improvement loan carried out just before my parents' financial collapse, turned the information over to the IRS since the income records did not match. This is where it may become bigger than you, Daniel warned me. If they have been evading taxes or exploiting your name to obtain further credit, the IRS will not simply shrug and walk away. Part of me felt queasy about it. These were still my parents, no matter how twisted up they were. The prospect of them facing an inquiry made my stomach turn. But another part of me, the one that had stood at a rural hotel counting crumpled cash while their identities remained clean, seemed more like justice. Several months have passed. There were forms, hearings, and more calls than I can count. Then the restraining order was made permanent. They contended in court that I was overreacting, that youngsters nowadays label anything abuse, and that they had only ever attempted to teach me responsibility. However, when tested under oath and with documents, their tale fell apart. They couldn't explain why they had open loans based on my social security number. They couldn't explain the messages that sounded like threats. They couldn't turn the idea of throwing their kid out on her birthday into a heroic sacrifice. The judge issued the injunction, noting a history of emotional manipulation and financial abuse. My parents exited the courtroom looking smaller than I'd ever seen them. That was only round one. Round two began after the IRS completed whatever silent job they were performing in the background. I was brought in as a witness, not a suspect, to explain what I knew and didn't know about the loans and accounts. I responded honestly. I had signed paperwork I didn't understand under duress. I had trusted that they would not utilize me. I had been kicked out of the house and finances the moment I ceased being convenient. When I walked out of the federal building, I felt as if I had opened a window that had been painted shut for years. Letters eventually began to arrive at my parents' address and new renting location. Notices, requests, and inquiries for unpaid taxes, undeclared income, and fraudulent applications. Their former house, which they had kicked me out of to make room for my sister, was confiscated and sold to satisfy a portion of their debt. The irony didn't escape me. The home that had served as their stronghold and symbol of supremacy was now gone as a result of their own decisions. Without that house, without solid credit, and without the steady career my father had lost, their alternatives narrowed rapidly. They moved into a modest apartment on the outskirts of town, then into something even smaller when the bills continued to arrive. My mother transitioned from bragging on Facebook about her beautiful family to posting vague rants about ungrateful children and crooked institutions, pointed but never detailed enough to admit what really transpired. My father picked up odd jobs and did anything he could, pride devoured whole. Ava, who previously mocked me for working at a grocery store, ended up folding clothes for a retail chain during the day and running delivery apps at night, screaming about how unjust the world was. I knew all this not because I tracked them, but because others emailed me screenshots with the question, "Is this about you?" I never responded publicly. Instead, I recounted my side of the story in a way that did not identify them, but did not conceal what happened. I discussed parents who utilize guilt to their advantage and families that believe they are entitled to their adult children's achievement while never accepting responsibility for the pain they have inflicted. I talked about getting booted out on my birthday, staying in a hotel, and learning to differentiate love from devotion to individuals who repeatedly mistreated me. The more I shared, the more I learned from others who had experienced variations on the same script. It turns out that I wasn't special, and that seemed surprisingly soothing. One night, some months after everything had been officially resolved, I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open when another email from a lender arrived. "We have concluded our inquiry," it stated. "We have determined that you are not liable for the debts in question. These accounts will be erased from your credit record." I gazed at the words for a while. My name, which they had signed on paperwork as if it was theirs to use, was now clear. My home was safe. My future was mine. I remembered my mother standing in this kitchen stating that it was a family asset. In a way, she was correct, but not in the manner she intended. Their journey finished with courtrooms and collection notices in little flats and lifestyles. Mine was only getting started. For the first time, the scales seemed balanced. They had driven me out, taken advantage of me, and attempted to grab all I had built. Finally, all they did was provide me with the space and determination to create a life beyond their reach. In the silence that followed the attorney's letters and courtrooms, I began to notice something disturbing. Winning does not make up for what you lost. There was no point when my parents suddenly understood. There was no heartfelt apology, no clean reconciliation. They continued telling everyone who would listen that I had wrecked their lives by putting a house above my own blood. I used to think about that charge, wondering whether there was any version of the narrative in which I could have helped them without harming myself. But every time I went through my own door, dropped my keys in the bowl by the threshold, and felt the solid weight of my own security, I knew the answer. They'd spent years persuading me that love included sacrificing yourself for their comfort. Cutting them off was the first lesson I created for myself. My life began to fill with different types of individuals. Coworkers who checked on me when I appeared exhausted. Neighbors who offered cookies as I shoveled their side of the sidewalk. Friends who crashed on my couch not because they had been booted out, but because we had been laughing too late to drive home. On Wednesday nights, I hosted a small group at my dining table, a mismatched circle of folks, each with their own story of a family that hurt more than it helped. We didn't sit around criticizing our parents. We compared notes on borders. We discussed therapy savings accounts, and the first moment each of us realized we could say no without presenting a lengthy list of reasons. My home became precisely what my parents had said. It was not a family asset, but a secure location where individuals might land, relax, and then relaunch on their own terms. Sometimes late at night, I would stand in the doorway of the extra room that they had desired for themselves and simply stare at it, the perfectly made bed, the bookshelf, and the desk where I occasionally wrote. I could almost see two timelines stacked on top of one another. In one, my parents were slamming doors and shouting about everything I had done wrong, transforming my house into another place I had to tiptoe about. In the one I picked, that room remained available for the version of myself who needed it the most, as well as anybody else seeking confirmation that starting anew was possible. I won't pretend it's simple to prioritize yourself over your family. It is one of the most difficult things I have ever done. There are still holidays when browsing through photos of large, happy families seated at long tables stings me. But I did learn something valuable. Blood is not an excuse to harm you repeatedly. Being related does not automatically provide someone access to your time, money, or home. Love without respect is simply control wrapped up in nicer language. My parents used to tell me that one day I'd thank them for kicking me out. I don't thank them for their brutality or falsehoods, but I will concede this. The day they kicked me out on my birthday marked the end of their tale and the beginning of mine. If you're listening to this and seeing aspects of your life in mine, I want you to know you're not insane. You are not ungrateful, nor are you alone. You are permitted to protect yourself. You are free to create a life in which the individuals who have wronged you are not permitted to participate. They attempted to assure me that the house was a family asset. They were correct about one thing. It's about family, but my true family.